Kia ora and welcome. I'm Sonia Barrett, a New Zealand clairvoyant, and welcome to part 3 of my short video series on weaponisation of spirituality and the occult. In this particular video, I'll be covering my perspective on the global awakening that we're all transitioning through at the moment. Quite excited about this one. If excited is the right word, I've been waiting a long time to get this out, so we shall begin. So I'm sure, as whoever is watching this, you are aware we're experiencing a huge global renaissance in spiritual consciousness. And what that means is we're also spoiled for choice for spiritual practices like no other time on earth, really. And, you know, that involves things like breath work, Reiki, cacao ceremonies, healing circles, light language, yoga, plant medicine ceremonies, all manner of upgrades of DNA, and the increasing themes on planetary and cosmic DNA. That's just a few of what's available to everybody at this time. So these are much more widely and globally accessible with technology, obviously. It can come right into your home now. There's also more information regarding remote viewing and modern psychic research. Both of these things are gaining more public recognition and acceptance, actually. So you most definitely can have a profound transformative experience in workshops or retreats. You know, it could be a feeling like a baptism of fire or a rebirthing phoenix moment. Without a doubt, that can happen in today's practices. I also think that that is dependent on how safe you feel with the facilitator's energy and their skill level, especially in terms of setting up a safe and protected space for this work, and how they hold space for people in these environments. And I personally believe that, you know, our own direct life experience of working through and processing and the integration of our own transformative work of both the light and the dark, this directly informs our style and delivery of the spiritual work that is on offer, which evolves as we do. I don't think it's ever really complete, personally. And if we consider that some of the ancient rites of passage could involve some pretty hefty symbolic death and rebirth rituals, for example, the Egyptian mystery schools, there was one named the Osirian rites, which could involve being placed in a sarcophagus, I think that's how it's pronounced, for up to 3 days. Or the Native American indigenous peoples, they had rites of passage for coming of age, for example, and that could involve being sent out alone into the wild with no food, maybe a knife, maybe some water, maybe not, for several days. And obviously in wild environments, you know, where you'd be facing danger, hunger, fear, solitude. So while some rituals may involve, or also some of those rituals might have involved the desert cactus peyote, which is a psychedelic plant medicine, and that can invoke visions and also encounters with spirit guides. So it could be quite a profound experience. In short, these ancient spiritual initiations, even the extreme ones like being buried alive, they were about mental, emotional, physical and spiritual transformation, a death and a rebirth, and they really pushed a person to confront their own fears, ego, and even death itself. So when they came back, they were no longer the same person. And it wasn't about torture, and it isn't about torture. It's about forcing a deep shift, about breaking down the old self so that a stronger, wiser, more spiritually awake and aware person self can emerge. And these types of environments can really sharpen your intuitive and psychic gifts especially if your survival depends on it. So we have to remember that these traditional rituals were also prepared for specific people for their awakening, and they were also given support afterwards from their spiritual mentors, leaders, and community itself. Today, in a modern context, as I've said, you can definitely have a death and rebirth type of experience in modern day experiences that are on offer. But we're also in a very high stress time on earth, with many people looking for solace, help, nurturing out of current circumstances and confusion through spiritual enlightenment. And that's great. That's where we're at right now. And as I've said, we're definitely sport for choice on where we might go looking for that, and where it is that we might find it. But this can also mean using less discernment because there's so much on offer. It may mean using less discernment on what we might allow into our energy and actually into our home, our personal, private environment through the internet, through the computer. And, you know, it must be remembered that the spiritual industry, as I've said in the other earlier parts, is big business. It's $1 billion industry, you know. In today's modern click and pick society, or pick and click society, it can also mean that in some instances, people may rapidly open up spiritually. They may rapidly open up their third eye or chakras or their kundalini energy, you know, prematurely, before they're ready for it, basically. And this can really be quite stressful and even detrimental to the mind, body and spirit of a person if they have not been prepared or supported through it, and indeed after it. It can bring up all manner of things for people. So that really is something to be aware of. Having power and knowledge is one thing. How you use it and channel it is another. And I'm talking about both sides of the fence, both a facilitator and someone who might come to a facilitator for it. So without proper integration of these tools, it can become power without presence, or presence without power. In other words, it's got the potential for an incomplete integration of what has occurred through the healing, the workshop, the ritual that you might have done. And, you know, in an ever-increasing, fast-paced world that we're in today, we don't always have the time, the support, or the skills to sufficiently integrate the journey. And I would argue that the most accessible support, information and mentorship is increasingly becoming social media and artificial intelligence, AI. One example is through ChatGPT, channeling your past life and planetary history, your spiritual powers, and at the same time counselling you on it in your own home. But let's look at what is out there today in terms of receiving this support and mentorship. So that's an overview of where we're going, and I'm now going to go into who is your guru, and from there we'll go into spiritual entitlement and a couple of other things. Okay, so we now have on the planet, we have a broad span of cosmic DNA lineages, and from different planets, Aryan, Surian, Reptilian, Nephilim, you name it. So that cosmological root race theory seems to be quite popular. We've also got the rise of the Christian mystics. And what is a Christian mystic? My understanding of a Christian mystic is Spiritual practice with a God consciousness are likened to using the Holy Spirit for delivery of spiritual practices, but not necessarily from the same narrative of what we have traditionally been taught about Christianity. I have listened to many podcasts with people interpreting parts of the Bible with a more esoteric meaning, reframing it. For example, I have heard people speak about Jacob's ladder in the Bible as being re-referenced as the human spine and Kundalini energy. I've also heard theologists talking about the New Age movement hijacking and reinterpreting parts of the Bible to cloak themselves and their practice, which is actually a dark practice, you know, and they might both be true. You know, what's important for you? So, was Jesus a Christian mystic? Well, as far as I'm aware, he was a healer, an alchemist, and he continued on his path of work despite the challenges. Didn't work out so well for him in the end, but there's a story to that as well, right? So I guess that makes him a spiritual warrior too. In my mind, yes, he was a Christian mystic. Yeah, how this is interpreted is fairly open right now. The Christian mystic theme, the overall God consciousness. I've also listened to religious ministers talking about hunting down Nephilim and reptilian hybrids to exorcise them, or worse, and effectively pointing out the dark side of modern day spirituality and the misuse of the word and term God consciousness. Now, there are approximately 300 versions and descriptions of what consciousness is. And the term God consciousness has been described as an overall blanket of white source love energy. Perhaps the Holy Spirit you could connect it with. There's many speakers on the global stage rewriting and reinterpreting the Bible or parts of it. You know, but we also know that many religious practices themselves have done many evil things in the name of the Holy Spirit and the Bible. We only have to look at pedophilia in the church and the history of the church in terms of the Spanish Inquisition, as discussed in part 1 history. And in the history part one history series that my earlier video that I did. Okay, so how do you define these terms and do they apply to you and your work or what you seek? And is it important to you to know how the facilitator is working? I would say discernment would say yes. I think most people, aware people, feel into what is right for them. Not just buy into the marketing or the dogma or the disguise. For me, it is about connecting directly to source consciousness, the divine, made of love, light, and ultimately the right intentions and integrity of becoming a sovereign being and your actions. I can relate to the term God consciousness myself as a spectrum of creative power, of positive intention and integrity for life on earth. The same as the Hippocratic oath of do no harm under the banner of love and light, you know, the good parts of all the religious elements that are out there. And this is the premise for my Third Eye Tips for Readers and Receivers of the Oracle course. It is absolutely based on this premise of the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm, which you can check out on my website for a quick plug there. Okay, so movements in humanity have been infiltrated and manipulated throughout history on Earth. And it's still happening today. And this is what this whole series, Weaponisation of Spirituality and the Occult, is to bring more awareness to how I see this happening in the global awakening of today. The spiritual practices are actually being used to study, capture, manipulate and harness special gifts and energy. You know, there are covens within spiritual groups. There are celestial vampires entangling people's energy, gifts and power through the use of light language, supposed sacred geometry and meditation and healing circles. Right ground for group energy harvesting. There's power in group energy, obviously. And I know this is happening because I've experienced it. Okay. Right. Which brings me to the next part. Right. Let's look at vampirism and harnessing energy. Okay. The massive global shift in consciousness is unveiling humanity's untapped potential and deepening our connection to multi-dimensional existence. We're seeing that everywhere. However, with so much available, discernment, as I keep saying, is key. And as previously mentioned, not every trainer, facilitator, organisation, tribe, or event is working in the light. Some of them might not even be aware that they're not working from the light. They may think they're working in the light, but there may be certain symbolism, patterns, codes that have been woven into that actually are siphoning out of that into something else. Some have been set up by dark forces in order to do this, to siphon your energy and imprint and implant different entities, or use geometric entanglement and to continue to do so. So you may be doing a meditation and the facilitator may be taking you through all sorts of sacred geometry. They may place a box in front of you and ask you to bring that box inside of your being, and during your meditation, just be aware that there may be something that has been placed in that box before you put it into your energy. Be very aware of that. So it can come in all sorts of many different forms, you know, light language that might be spoken, healing groups, online or in person, even in frequencies. Anything can be corrupted, really. It can also come from, you know, if you're a reader, it can come from someone to see you and they've brought all sorts of attachments and entities with them, or maybe practicing a dark order and they may be looking to practice or measure their whatever they're doing on you. So, you know, discernment's really key in every area. Some people may be unaware that they've been courted to during some group practice. Okay, you may not know this is happening until it's too late, and you may not even attribute it to its source. So it's a good practice to have spiritual hygiene routine before and after any spiritual work you do or receive, and just make it part of your daily practice, really, to cleanse and clear your energy. Be grounded, know who you are. Truth has a frequency, feel into it, you will sense it, even if it doesn't make sense to your logical mind. You know, use your intuition. Knowing who you are and having sovereignty over your own mind, body and spirit will help protect you. Trust in yourself will also help you stay authentic and grounded in the present, so you'll know what's your energy and what's not. So therefore you'll become very aware very quickly of when something comes in that's not yours. And that can be the same for any messages that you might receive. If something, the wording's different, the feel's different, you know, it's not something you would normally engage with. That can also be signs of synthetic telepathy or mind-to-mind intrusion, but I'll get to that. Okay, so being disciplined and maintaining a daily spiritual hygiene practice will give you confidence to handle whatever comes your way, mentally, physically, emotionally and spiritually. Having a very good spiritual daily practice, but you know, you can't be doing that and then putting crap into your body, eating bad food or watching all sorts of stuff that's just not doing you any good. It's got to be holistic all-round practice. Okay, so psychic attacks are real. It's basically a low vibration of energy sent to you from a bad intention or dark force in order to overthrow or feed off your energy. Being able to go into the shadow and still hold space with the light is a practical learned skill based in experience. So what do I mean by that? You, like for instance, I'll use myself as an example. In order for me to help certain people with my readings or healings, I feel in order to go in and kind of pull them out of the darkness, you have to recognize what the darkness is and know that you can go in there without any fear and come back out clear. And obviously you'll have to do some work afterwards. I always do. Even if I feel I don't, I always do it. So it's about having experience of the dark so that you can recognize the dark, you can go into the dark, and you can come back out of the dark. And what do I mean by that? It can be through feelings, emotions, being able to recognize what it is and being able to help others out of it. I hope that makes sense. So practice and consistency are imperative for identifying low energies. I have personally experienced a international spiritual leader who speaks often about embracing their shadow side to the point really where it's off, okay? And this person travels around the world regularly, doing healing workshops and plant medicine ceremonies and all manner of different things with their, I'll say, tribe, light language and what have you. And this person, you know, on the surface they're quite interesting, charismatic, they're good looking, you know, they're saying all the right things. They often run global meditations which are free online, and they have a membership to their tribe. Nothing wrong with that until you encounter quantum entanglement through this person's meditations, which I have, where they can bind you. There's actually a coven hidden within it and siphon out your energy, your abundance, and your skills, try and clone it. This happens. This is a reality. This is what's at work out there, and this is why discernment is really, really key. Now, this particular person, you know, has a lot of females in their membership, and that's because they deal in a lot of sexual energy harvesting. And that's a whole nother video, but I'm not going to go into that today. What I will say though is that this person made a mistake and actually slipped up by confessing that they have been drinking their partner's menstrual blood in a full moon ritual. Now, for me, that's just vampirism, full stop. So we have a layering effect here. We have vampirism, we have sacred geometry entanglement, we have a face for the marketing, but there's a contradiction in different videos when you study these things. This one particular person who I've studied for a long time, there's a lot of contradictions, saying one thing that you know they don't actually believe. So they're trading in souls through their membership. Okay, so they're very proficient in what and how they do it, by using telepathic intrusions, mind-to-mind intrusions, remote viewing. The thing with vampires and falling entities is that they cannot create for themselves. They can only take. They can only take from others and from humanity. So, you know, they will steal and invert content like this. You know, they can use basically that's what they do. They steal and invert content. So in order to disguise themselves as somehow working in the light and on the same page when really they've sold their soul and they're practicing vampirism spiritually and physically. Okay, now, if this feels or seems a bit too weird to you, what I would recommend is that you watch a movie that's still out now, and it's called Sinners. It's a bit slow to start, but stay with it because that explains exactly how these modern day vampires work. This is not an isolated person or an isolated case. It'll show you how the vampire needs to be invited into your energy. So by signing up, going to a workshop or doing the meditation, you're inviting them into your energy. It will also highlight to you how not only do they need to be invited into your space, but how they will lull you into their realm through practices, words, music. There's a lot of magic involved, glamoring. They will glamour you. They're full of illusions, using sweet words and music, promises of belonging to a like-minded tribe. Okay, so this movie speaks truth to how this is happening in the spiritual community. You absolutely get it, I think. Once you see that, you understand what I'm talking about. This is the type of thing that they've been using in the music industry and Hollywood. And it's been used right throughout the spiritual community. This is weaponization of spirituality using occult practices within the spiritual movement. And because everyone is waking up, it's just feeding time for these entities and these groups. And this is why it's so important, I feel, to share these experiences with people, because people are unaware of it. I think quite often there's this blanket trust given over to anyone who speaks or seems like they're from the light for the light, because of toxic positivity that's out there, not to question. Just be love and light, you know, just trust. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to end this video with saying you have been warned. Go well. Okay, I shall see you in the next video. Okay, thank you for sticking with me to the end of part 3. I just want to quickly summarize parts 1 to 3, the first 3 videos or parts in my series. So in part 1, we looked at the history of suppression of spirituality by murder, captivity, and occult practices in a very 3D physical experience during the 14 to 1700s, while at the same time using and capturing these spiritual gifts. Whereas in part 2, we looked at the influence of secret societies to the point of political movements, genocide and war, and these same influences that have also shaped what we call the New Age movements of today. So today we've looked at how the New Age and spiritual movement is an open season for what's on offer, and how it can be infiltrated and manipulated from within spirituality itself, ultimately weaponizing spiritual and esoteric practices in order to suppress gifts and harness energy. So be aware that given the history of what has come before us in terms of suppression and control to a now saturated market and an unprecedented encouragement to open up, explore and enhance our spiritual gifts from everywhere, it's not all for love of humanity, I'm afraid. That's my viewpoint on it, and that's what I'm sharing here. I ask you to consider the possibility that we may be getting encouraged to open up and explore as a God-given right, and I believe that that is true. We're at that time where we are in expansion, but it's also been hijacked at the same time. You know, it's building a sense of spiritual entitlement. Therefore, people are bypassing critical thinking and discernment, and they're getting lulled into accepting that the messages or voices that they might be hearing or practices that they're going to may not in fact be a spiritual experience, but rather a form of weaponized spirituality through the likes of synthetic telepathy. You know, opening the floor to identify particular gifts and DNA for studying and maybe even control. I want you to consider the possibility that of people accepting particular narratives of a new earth and outer planetary storylines as a means to program people to believe that certain DNA may mean harm to you and will also need to be modified in the very near future or suppressed. People with certain gifts, you know, there may be a need to bring back in some type of regulation and control. And I'm going to speak to that more in the next 2 parts about the law and technology. I think I'll leave that there. It's quite a lot to put out there, and I hope that I haven't just, well, I hope that you can follow where I'm going with this, and to at the very least, give it some consideration and use discernment in whatever you choose to do going forward. So, thank you, and peace be with you.